So yeah, let's start with the cliche: who you are and how you got into music.
Sweet. I'm Andrew Michael Wells. I'm from Provo, Utah. I got into music at a pretty young age. I mean, there are videos of me as like a little kid playing little toy guitars and singing at the top of my lungs. And I feel like I've always kind of been a character, even when I was younger. I like to entertain people. Um, what really got me into music kind of came in different stages of when I was younger. Um, like the very first record I remember buying with my own money was "Paranoid" by Black Sabbath, and I remember it
Okay,
just scaring the shit out of me. I
from the
remember
cover or just the music or all of it.
yeah, all of it. I remember my dad, he would drive around in his old pickup truck, and my parents divorced at a younger age. He would pick me up every other weekend, and every time we drive home, he'd be blasting like War Pigs or Iron Man, and just kind of the classics. He was a big Iron Maiden fan too, and I remember buying Black Sabbath's Paranoid and going to Fairies Wear Boots, Jack the Ripper, the closing track on that record, and it just like blowing my mind. And so that kind of introduced me to the heavier side of music, and that got even more solidified over time with some different heavy bands. And then I kind of got into that teenage phase of getting into punk music and kind of pop punk music, like Blink 182,
Right.
bands like Good Charlotte, even, and Green Day. I remember seeing a Good Charlotte concert and just being fucking pumped and just saying to myself at like 11 or 12, like, this is what I want to do. These guys are fucking great. And looking back, I'm like, oh, that's a weird inspiration to start, but whatever. And so I remember seeing that show and asking my dad for a guitar for Christmas, because originally when I started playing music in general was on the flute. It was when it was when
Recorders and all that kind of
Yep,
stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
Or and then like the actual flute, the woodwind instruments. I got involved with that in about fifth or sixth grade, and I kept with that for a little while, and I eventually in high school went to brass instruments and guitar and drum set and bass and jazz band. I sang in choirs, it's like three different choirs at my high school, and just kind of got enveloped in music. But outside of school, I was trying to start my own bands. I grew up with my brother Brandon, who's now in Eidola, and he picked up the guitar about a year or two after I did. At the age of 13 is when my dad bought me my first guitar. It was this little shitty silver tone. It's like he spent like $1.75 on the guitar and an amp,
Amp.
and
Yep. Looked
I
like a
think
Fender
I had,
knockoff.
yeah, I think I had like I don't I the Digitech death metal pedal, just like the classic.
It's good to know
Fuck,
that the classic starter kits are all the tools are all the same.
yep, it's all yep, exactly. So my dad, I mean, my dad's been a cop for like 25 years. He got remarried and grew out of metal music and heavy music. He used to have a big mullet and a big beard. He shaved all that off, started listening to smooth jazz, and but he bought me that guitar, and I started picking it up, and basically he got me a couple of lessons, but I quit that pretty quickly and just self-taught myself from there. And the two concerts I remember kind of solidifying why I wanted to do music in its entirety, like why I wanted to pursue it so actively. I saw two shows same year when I was 16. I saw one show as a band called ISIS,
Hmm.
and that show was fucking incredible. One of the best shows I have ever seen. They played a bunch of songs off Panopticon, and um, just killer show. They were touring with a band called Torch.
Yep. I just saw them actually a week
Oh,
ago.
really? Who went
Yeah.
on tour?
They are on tour with Russian Circles and Mastodon.
Oh, fuck me, dude. I doubt that that's coming to Utah, but that sounds awesome.
I once again left before Mastodon started. I just wanted to go see Russian Circles and or no, I'm sorry, Torch. Actually, I'm sorry, wrong show. I just saw these two shows, these two tours back to back. That was actually Russian Circles, Eagles of Death Metal, Mastodon, and the tour a week before that was Code Orange, Torch, Gojira.
Oh man, I love Gojira too. Those are
Yeah,
great lineups. Yeah,
yeah.
I remember that ISIS show was like ISIS, Torch, a band called Zozobra, and a band called Hesu. They're kind of more
Is
underground
that how you say it? I always
drum.
thought it was Jesu, Jesu.
I guess, yeah, it could be Jesu.
I don't know.
They were, yeah, it was very foreign at the time. I don't remember liking that band too much. But yeah, ISIS blew my mind, and then I saw Circa Survive for the first time. It was on their On Letting Go tour, and I think it was 15 or 16 years old. It was like right as Circa was starting to come up. It was probably it was a place called the Avalon Theater for like 300 or 400 people.
I just saw Circa play a 400 cap room about 2 months ago. Like they were finished with that tour they were doing with AFI, and then on their way home, they're like to one of the bigger indie promoters around here. They're like, find us a small room, and so they played to like 400 people. So I went and saw Eated on that Taking Back Sunday tour, and then left during Taking Back Sunday, and then jetted across the street to go see Circa play a 400 cap room with no barricade or nothing.
Damn, lucky man. Yeah, I would kill to see Circa in a 400 cap room again. I remember
think Anthony likes it.
No, I doubt it. Last time in Salt Lake, he stage dove into the audience and somebody punched him in the eye. Gave him a full-on black eye, and he was just like, yeah, I'm getting too old for this bullshit. Like, I can't be fucking jumping in these people getting black eyes all the time. I'm like 35.
Yeah, there was a bunch of stage diving people, and he didn't seem like he enjoyed having people on his stage. But he was super nice. Yeah. He signed the poster that I got last minute before he went on the bus. But it still trips me out that there are people smaller than me. I mean, I'm only 5'6", 5'7", and so when people walk up to me, I'm like, holy shit, you're shorter than I am. Still weird.
I love that man. He's a sweetheart, dude. It was always my dream as a kid to like meet him, and now that I've met him multiple times and I've talked with him, he's super genuine. He's like one of the few people I can say that my heroes that I've met that is just a great dude through and through.
Confirmed he will be on the next Eidola record.
Oh, fuck. I would kill for that.
I mean, that'd probably be a bunch of your recording budget, but...
Yeah, I'll hit up Will, see if we can get the budget for it.
Something actually, in doing the research I've done on the different podcasts you've done and some of the written interviews I've seen you do over the last year or two, I'm kind of interested to find out what your schooling background is like. Because obviously anyone who listens to Eidola, and it seems like any of the interviews that you've done, people are very astute to the lyrics and the themes and concepts going on within the record. And, no one surprisingly has asked what your background was in schooling to see if any of your upbringing or your schooling, because I feel like maybe you went to school for like psychology or theology or something like that, and kind of wanted to ask you if that's actually the case, or if I just kind of am inquisitive and reading too much into what I think is some of your influences.
For sure. I definitely appreciate the question. Surprisingly enough, I do not have any schooling after high school. Its maximum was high school graduate. I graduated really early. I had all my credits like in my junior year, and I decided to take a few music classes, strictly music, for the shorter half of my senior year, and then I just got fed up and bounced. But in terms of where I've kind of cultivated a lot of these concepts and where I've gotten a lot of this information from that I use in the themes and the concepts, the motifs, is not only based on personal experience with what I would consider as the divine, but just a lot of reading. My upbringing was based in Utah, in the most Mormon part of Utah. So that was
another question that I was going to span off on, was just how much of where you live also affects, if it wasn't the schooling or going to for that, how much of where you live is also what shapes your lyrical content.
Yeah, I would say a great deal. I think that the environmental factors for sure impact it, not only from my past but currently. It's an interesting environment to be in, especially to grow up in a place like this where my parents divorced at a young age. They both got remarried. They're both very lofty on their views about spirituality and religion. They're pretty much like, I would consider them both agnostic, borderline atheist. And my step-parents too are kind of in the same realm. They're just more so agnostic than anything else. But when you're in the most LDS state, in the most LDS city within that state, it does, as far as the county goes in the city, there is a certain level that you're expected to behave at, just socially.
Right.
I think when you start growing your hair out, or you get tattoos, or you have a beard, or you want more than 3.2% beer, or
I forgot about that.
Like anything you drink. It used to be, even when I was growing up, the LDS church, they didn't allow you to drink like caffeinated drinks at all.
Yeah. Okay.
So a lot of, like, my mother-in-law, she loves Diet Coke, just Coke, Diet Coke, loves it. But the religion just wouldn't allow her to do it until recently, like 2 or 3 years ago. They changed it, and now she's rocking the full 7-Eleven cups, and it's I agree with that. I think that you should be able to drink what you want, as long as you're not harming anybody else, and you're okay with the harm to yourself. I mean, soda's bad. It's like, I don't think anybody's contesting that, but it's for a religious doctrine to say, or to heavily imply, it's the word of wisdom to not do that. I think is, it comes with the culture, but that, again, it just expresses the fact that when you're growing up in that environment, you're expected to behave and function kind of at a certain level that everybody else is on, except for a very small portion. And so what tends to happen is it breeds this counterculture in that same environment. You get a lot of people that they want to do the opposite. They go, oh, well, fuck you. I don't want to follow this. I want to do the opposite. I want to start doing drugs. I want to start having sex. I want to do anything to rebel and defy. And since the culture is so heavily regulated and so heavily observed by the society, it definitely causes a lot of that cultural argument. So for me, when I grew up in that, my parents they weren't religiously affiliated. So I kind of had to look elsewhere for these things. And because I'd gone to Mormon churches, my stepdad's parents, they were very LDS. They took us to church on weekends occasionally, and I felt like there was something there, but it really just didn't apply to me, this specific branch of Christianity. And so I just kind of felt like there was more. When I was younger, I was just basically an atheist. I just kind of thought that God wasn't real. And then I went through a really kind of my initial entrance into depression and anxiety when I was younger. And I kind of, everybody at that age, you're angsty, or that angsty teen. And I got caught up in some emo culture where, I was cutting, and I dyed my hair black, and I was doing all these things, and there was definitely an underlying depressive element to what I was going through, and I didn't really seek out help. And so there was a moment where, we'll just say it was basically kind of a very suicidal moment, or very close to suicide, in terms of an attempt. And that was when I was about 16, and I didn't go through with it, obviously. So I wanted to find something else that really helped me kind of address that underlying problem. Right. And so I started turning to spirituality and started looking at faith in different ways than what was being presented to me. Not the lofty version of faith that my parents had, and not this like very narrow focused, microscopic version of faith that was in the culture around me. So right. I started reading, I read the Bible, I read the Quran, I started reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead, I started reading the Four Truths, the Bhagavad Gita, just all these different books. And then I started reading more modern interpretations of the books too, like Be Here Now by Ram Dass, Grist Mill, also by Ram Dass, Doors of Perception, Perennial Philosophy, these more modern interpretations of these older texts and how they can be applied. And so that's kind of shaped my general worldview, which is constantly changing. It's constantly adaptable based on experience. And although I wouldn't say I have like technical schooling in those areas, I would say that I'm relatively well read. I pride myself in trying to learn as much as possible in any context. So,
has there been anything in your reading of all these different religions and subsets and all that you have found to be universally the same? And how
A
shocking
lot.
that, yeah, I was gonna say, and how shocking it
Yeah.
may be considering how far removed everything was.
Yes, absolutely. I think that a greater majority, I wouldn't say all, I would say that there are definitely some fundamental differences in belief structures between like Judeo-Christian religions and a lot of Eastern religions, or even some earlier monotheistic religions. I think there are some core principles that differ, but I would go to bat and say that a general majority of the problems that are perceived by people in those religions are made up based on the fact that the verbiage is just different. It's just
Yeah.
it's slightly different verbiage. It's a slightly different interpretation, and a lot of people take that as you're wrong, I'm right. This is something we have to disagree on because the terminology is something that we don't necessarily grasp, and
Yeah.
that oftentimes comes down to language barriers. It comes down to just how language is developed in different places in the world. I think that a lot of core issues there are a lot of parallels to be drawn between a lot of different faiths and creeds, and so I respect a lot of people for their belief. I know a lot of counterculturalists, like coming back to Utah in particular, they just try to dismantle anything remotely
Yeah.
Christian
Yeah.
and be, and just say, oh, you can't believe in that. Religion is inherently evil. And it's like, no, you're just as bad as these people that are so far gone and so far removed from any sense of empathy with other people's faith. It's just as toxic, in my opinion. Somebody who goes out of their way to say that it's that religion or belief in something that's higher than you is inherently bad. I don't agree with that.
Yeah. Something I wasn't sure if I was going to ask just because I didn't know how silly of a question it would be, but I've never, very much in the way that when I tell people I'm from Delaware and people go, I've never met anyone from Delaware, and then ask me questions. I don't know
Yeah.
anyone from Utah. My wife has been there and told me about the flavorings that they put in instead of like shots and stuff like that, and kind of explained the whole how you have to order like liquor there at a bar,
Mm.
which is interesting to say the least.
It's very, yeah.
But I kind of had wondered. I mean, with you living in Provo, and I'm pretty sure I'm so terrible about doing this on almost every episode of this. I believe we're around the same age. I just turned 33. I think you're about 27, 28, if I'm not mistaken.
I just turned 26 this summer.
Okay. Okay.
So yeah, pretty close. Yes.
But what was, because I don't imagine there being a huge hotbed scene in Utah as far as like a local scene or whatever. I could be wrong, and I probably am. But
You're not wrong.
okay.
You're-
So obviously, with my age, and you kind of alluded to, I mean, sort of like when you were talking about when you were 16 and stuff like that, I couldn't help but think of My Chemical Romance and the Used and the emo scene that came out around then. What was it like living in Utah, especially when the Used broke? Because I feel like that kind of like I know what it's like living here in Michigan and Grand Rapids, and I have a handful of bands I can think of in a few different genres between White Stripes or the Verb Pipe or Still Remains or a lot of these other bands in different subgenres. What's it like for you to have a band that's probably the only band I can think of really that came out of where you are, and especially amongst the kind of social and religious landscape that you live in, and kind of seeing like what they did and have done?
it's it's humbling. It's really interesting because I was pretty young when they broke.
Okay.
I remember listening to the Used and being like, wait, these guys are from Orem, Utah? Are you fucking kidding me? This record sounds amazing. And but it was again, I didn't get into them till probably 2 or 3 years after they broke because I was still pretty young at the time. I think I was only 12 or 13 when they actually broke, and
Yeah.
I hadn't quite made it into the emo scene yet.
Right.
But my drummer, he's a couple years older than me. He was a freshman when I can't remember who their youngest member was. I think it was Brandon Steinekert.
Yeah.
He graduated high school right as Matt was coming into high school,
Okay.
and that was when that's when the Used broke and they hit the ground running, and they had that first record, the Maybe Memories or the self-titled, however you look at it, and then In Love and Death that kind of really just kept them going, and it was really cool for me to look at that and go, oh yeah, it can be done for sure. You can break out of this scene even though there really isn't one. But for the rest of the scene, they don't give a shit. Nobody around here talks about the Used. Nobody.
That's crazy.
And it's so shitty. It just goes to show you that like uh, in an environment like this, it's so polarizing in Utah. There because it fluctuates. Sometimes there's like a local scene, sometimes there's not. There hasn't been a real uh, local rock scene in a while, and it's because the bands, it's like crabs in a barrel, and we
Oh,
experienced
okay.
the very first. I mean, it's that to the teeth. It's we experienced this when we first got signed to Blue Swan Records, which like universally isn't that big of a fucking deal. Like it's great. I love Blue Swan Records. I love Will. He's one of my best homies. He's helped put Eidola in an international spotlight that I don't think we could have done on our own.
Right.
And super grateful for that because we've gotten the opportunity to connect with thousands and thousands of people all over the world and share what we feel and what we write. But it's like it's not like getting signed to fucking Capitol or Atlantic or one of these record labels. It wasn't like the Used. It wasn't like it popped off. It was like Eidola got signed, and we've spent the last 4 years on the road grinding and making records to like get out there, and we're just as much a working class band as any other national and international touring act. We're on the grind just like everybody else, and that's how it should be. More bands should be breaking out of this scene here. More bands should be driven and ambitious to go and do those things and accomplish them. But in Utah, it's really difficult because you have these crabs in a barrel. Anytime anybody gets any sort of notoriety or publicity, they just grab them and pull them back down. They try to just start a bunch of shit, start a bunch of rumors, and just pull them down. They just try to pull them down to a lower level. And what that's caused is such a level of toxicity in the counterculture and the cultural rock scene that no one wants to go out to shows. No one wants to put on shows. No one wants to build a local community of bands because next thing you know it, one band's getting a radio interview and then the other band's like, no, we're blacklisting them from any shows we play because they're getting out there. It's like, no, that you guys should be helping each other.
Yeah.
We should be elevating each other musically and professionally so that we can build a scene that people think is cool. Like, you look at places like, I mean, even Memphis, right? You have like your cliche Nashville scene, but Memphis has a super dope scene that is really cool, that bands just help each other out. Louisville, our friends Artifacts Pareo from there, like they've cultivated this really cool scene where they can put a bunch of locals on a bill, sell out a 400 cap room, no problem, because they've cultivated that.
Yeah.
For us, we've barely gotten to the point where we can sell out, a 200 or 300 cap room here by ourselves with almost no support. But that's taken years, like almost 6 years, to do in this scene because everybody just tries to cut each other's throats and they try to undermine each other all the time.
So in light of that, I mean, let's kind of talk about Eidola's formative years. Like, in light of all that, what made you want to start a band? What did the beginning look like for you guys as far as playing out? I mean, if there's not really much of a scene, is it just a lot of what I kind of call more of the internet age of bands, like where people just are like, everyone has enough of, a laptop that has some kind of recording software, one person in the band dedicated usually to learning how to do everything, buying some equipment, and then basically making a home quote unquote studio, and then just basically writing and recording, throwing it up, maybe making some CDs, you play a couple live shows, whatever. Was that kind of the route you guys had to take due to the fact that there isn't a scene, or were you kind of very much like, in spite of the fact that there isn't a scene, we're gonna push even harder to kind of not only be the thriving band in our scene, but kind of like, okay, well then we're gonna go out further because there's nothing really to support us here. So like, in a way, I almost feel like it might be freeing because you're like, I don't have to prove myself here. I can actually just kind of hit the road and do the thing I want to do without the bullshit first part.
Totally.
Maybe I'm wrong.
It was a little bit of both, honestly. I feel like there was a part of us that really wanted to carve our own path here and really wanted to build something special in the Provo community. And we tried. We tried for the first 2 years of our existence, year and a half, 2 years. We really tried to grind locally and set up really cool shows and work with various venues. We had a venue here called Muse Music and Velour, and even this like these high school kids where they would take an audio class and they had a room that their teachers had basically bought from the school that they would turn into a live venue. And so they would practice recording and engineering, live audio and sound. So cool. I'd never had that in high school. So I was
I've
like, fuck
never
yeah.
heard of that either. That's awesome.
Yeah. So cool. So we wanted to be a part of that. And it was decent for a while. And then the provo scene kind of got, again, it was polarized. It was the indie folk Americana Mormon bands were like doing really well locally, and the rock bands just weren't popping off. Like, people just didn't like to go to those shows as much if they weren't cultivated with a lot of bands on the bill, or they weren't done in the right way. And so the rock bands kind of got at each other's throats, and so we started looking for opportunities elsewhere. We said, okay, well, we want to, just like you said, we want to start getting out there, expanding our reach, and with the internet, we can do that. We have the ability to record something locally for cheap, that's basically DIY, put it out on and get everything done in-house and get out there and try to tour. And that's what we did. We toured regionally. We did a few DIY tours that we completely booked ourselves. And then we opened for Stolas in Salt Lake, and that's where we gave them our first record, The Great Glass Elephant. They took it to Will, and Will and I linked up, and we had just put it out, like literally a month prior. And Will messaged me, and he's like, when you doing a new one? I'm like, I don't know, man. I've got like 6 songs written or something. Like, I can demo some stuff out. And he's like, okay, I'm interested. Let's talk. And over the course of the next like 6 months or so, we finished writing and pre-proing out Degeneratera, and we sent him all of those demos, and he was like, okay, cool, we're in business. Let's book some studio time. Let's get you on the label. And at that point was kind of the turning point for us, where, like, even then, we were so small even back then when we announced the signing. I mean, we were so stoked to get like 50 likes on Facebook, or like, super stoked to get any type of recognition outside of the local scene. And that kind of put us more on a national platform where people started looking at us and looking at our band. And that's when we got picked up by Artery for touring. We got the opportunity to get out and tour more, both before Degeneratera came out, and then as soon as it came out, we hit the ground running with tours. And again, that just kind of separated us from the local scene in ways we didn't really want or predict. We wanted to pursue our careers and tour. That was our main goal. We wanted to get out there and we wanted to meet people. We wanted to experience these things with fans in a live setting. We wanted to, I mean, music for us is very cathartic. It's a very meditative process for us. So to go out there and share that with other people was always our main goal. So yeah, we got the opportunity to do that. But again, it gives you less focus. I mean, the show we played here in Salt Lake a couple weeks ago is the first local show, hometown show we played in months, like 6 or 8 months. You stop focusing on that local grind as much, and your band kind of evolves into a national, international touring act. And yeah, it definitely comes with the territory, I feel like, for a lot of bands.
It's interesting because that's actually how I found you guys was through you working with Artery. I had gotten the tour offer for you guys in Que Sera, and it was one of those, like, somehow I keep on random occasions get on some random person's radar, and then I just get basically every tour offer that this person gets. And a lot of times it's like, here's Death Metal Fest tour going around with like 9 death metal bands that need like $1,200 on a Monday, and can't have any locals, and you're like, no way. You're like, oh god, yeah. But so in the midst of all that, I had gotten the offer for you guys in Que Sera, and I think at the time maybe one other. So I kind of wasn't really feeling it, and then I was like, another 3-band bill. I can only probably have 1 or 2 locals, if anything, and I don't even know if it's going to make enough for the guarantee. Like, well, I guess I'll just check out this band because it doesn't say death metal, and it doesn't have like cracked mirror like logo or anything like that. I was like, all right. So I ended up checking it out, and they had sent, I want to say when I had been shopped the tour, I think Degeneratera had just come out, because at that point, Contra, I think, was the single that they were shopping you guys for. And it was really interesting. Like, I kind of listened to it, and it was kind of like a slow beginning, and I was like, okay, this isn't what I thought it was. I don't know what I was expecting, but with the name, I don't know. And then it just kind of, it's the song I ended up showing everybody when I was like really stoked to book the show. Because I was like, I think this is the best song. Like, really, like, I mean, the whole album is incredible, but I was like, this is kind of like shows a little bit of everything that happens within this band within 4 or 5 minutes. And then it was crazy to realize that Que Sera was basically the old Sideshow, and that I had been in contact with their old drummer like a year before when they went to come up to record the album that they were on when you guys were touring together.
Yeah.
So it was very weird that it's like, had it not been for me checking that out, I wouldn't have remembered that they were that band, and then kind of subsequently been friends with those dudes. Like, we just went and saw, if you can see behind me, their last show in Rhode Island.
Oh yeah, yeah, I know. Yeah, I love those guys. It was a shame that they put it down.
Yeah. Well, maybe it'll come back in 5 years. That seems to be the trend.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, they'll be selling out the hella rooms. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting to kind of have figured, because I listened to a band of your caliber that doesn't, in a way, with how well the album was mixed and produced and just everything about it, that doesn't sound like a band that's only a couple years old to me. I mean, there are those exceptions where people have been in other bands and just the collaborative efforts that they have all put in end up making the sum of the parts better than what you would expect from such a young band. But I definitely was not expecting that to be the case, and kind of like something I had said with JM from The Body Rampant a couple of weeks ago during our chat was, I was like, you can tell like a band that spends their money the right way. Like, you can put out a shit sounding CD and it might garner people to buy it, but it's like, if it sounds really good, then people are going to be excited about hearing the songs and keep coming back to them or finding little things about it.
Yep.
And it's like, kind of just the cliche, if you give a shit, then people will give a shit. And I was just so blown away by how well that record sounded. And I'm not going to go too much into the actual record because you've been on record. That's really redundant. Yeah. Talking about that record specifically. So, I mean, if anyone, I think you even did an album commentary track or something like that, like on a
I did, yeah.
Thing for that. So I'll link that in the notes if anyone actually really wants to go through in depth with that record.
Yeah.
Something I more wanted to know, and I don't think you've hit on it really, but I know you do a lot of demoing stuff yourself with the guitar playing and vocals and stuff like that. So with the concepts, because you had, when Degenitera came out, I think maybe 6 to 8 months after it had been out, you guys broke down a fan asked, I don't remember which it was, you broke down what the album artwork meant, all the different pieces of it and how it related to the bigger narrative of what you were trying to accomplish in the narrative of the record with the lyrics and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
How much of that takes shape before, like, do you kind of have like these ideas that you are like I know, like, when I write for different things, I have words that like I want to start incorporating, like a word that I think is really awesome and it's a different word that you don't hear very often, so it'll kind of makes people take notice. And I have just ideas jotted all over the place. Do you have like, here's an album title, here's a cool word or a cool phrase that I've thought of, and here's some imagery that I saw when I found this thing, and I would like to call a song this, or blah blah blah, and it may not be a fully fleshed out idea now, but the piece of paper to remind you to come back to it is there. Do you do that with the records and the songs and kind of come up with a concept before? Does it happen during the songwriting as you're kind of putting everything together? And then the last part of this multi-part question, I'm really interested to figure out how stressful it is for you guys to put together your track listing.
Killer questions. I love that. The answer to the first part would be, it is a little bit of both, but that does happen to me all the time. Okay. Oftentimes I'll come up with song titles before I even come up with lyrics or content. Like this new record that I just finished writing right now, I'm demoing it out this week.
Okay, I was like, not the newest one you just finished?
No, not that one that we just put out like 4 months ago.
The new one we're already on.
Yeah, I just finished writing LP4 for Eidola.
Okay.
And although it's we still got a ton of time to refine. I mean, we literally just put Speak to Listen out. Again, it was like 4 months ago.
Yeah.
I have all these songs like ready in my brain, but before they were even constructed, I had come up with the name of the album, all 10, 11 song titles. I'd already come up with the concept of the song titles, and I already had a visual in my head of what I wanted the color scheme to be, what I want the artwork to look like. And it's interesting because this record, this LP4 that I've been working on, it's come more naturally for me in that context of things coming to me before they're even manifested. So it gives me even more time to edit and refine, which is awesome. In the past, it's been more of a kind of process. Like The Great Glass Elephant was definitely more of a trial and error of finding new things out, trying new things out. The concept was concrete, but it was still kind of loose. It was an adaptation of something we'd kind of worked through in the first year or so of being a band. And so we just got better at it over time, and things come a little quicker. With our track listings, it is a nightmare for sure. It's usually The Great Glass Elephant was pretty easy because we had no pressure. We were like, okay, band, we've got this concept. It's cool. This sounds good. We've got these, because we grouped it into a color scheme.
Right.
And I haven't done a track by track for this record, but basically the protagonist of the story has 3 different mentors that are kind of divided in the primary color scheme. So the first of the record is red, the middle half is yellow, the last half is blue. We took that and associated the song characteristics with those colors. So red was a little bit more aggressive. It's very, very punchy, very straightforward. You have songs like Going Nowhere, Argue, Frank Sinatra that are just kind of these more punk rock, anthemic, aggressive, angsty songs. And then it moves into the middle half of the record, which is yellow, which is more of our groovy, happy, kind of fun songs like Yarze Homily, Bastard's Fire. And then it moves into the last part of the record, which is blue, that we identified with more of the introspective, solemn, spacey type songs like The Golden Rule and Ours. So that record, it was a little bit easier because we kind of color coded it in a way.
Right.
Okay, well, yeah, we can put these songs here based on feel. Degeneratera was not like that. Degeneratera was fucking nightmare because James and I had come up with the overarching concept and the overarching themes and the duality. And we're like, okay, well, now we've got to like really refine. We got to refine certain lyrical motifs to fit within the polarity. We've got to make sure that these songs are placed in the appropriate positions to be juxtaposed correctly so that the themes can transfer, so that it's timeless. So it's not just one listen and you're done. It's like you can come back to that record in 5, 10, 15 years and get something different from it. That's our goal.
Yeah.
And I shit you not, we were so terrified because Will called us and was like, I don't like this track listing. No! We were terrified. We're like, well, what do we do? This dude's been in the business. He's sold a bunch of records. Like, this was before I worked with him in like a personal capacity, really.
Right.
So he was like, no, I don't like that track listing. I think that you're going to get better responses if you stack all of your singles at the first of the record, which is how Dance has always done it. They've always stacked their shit at the beginning. And so he made that point, and he's like, I think this record's going to pop off better if you put your stuff
front
at the
load
beginning.
it.
Well, that ruins our whole concept. Like, duality of the concept, like the actual concepts written here, it ruins it. Yeah. And his kind of pitch, again, he didn't know us at the time. He just knew that he liked the music we made. As a label owner, like, well, I think that the concept doesn't really matter right now because you're just a brand new band. But if you guys are dead set on it, you can do it. So we were like, yeah, man, we're dead set. So we put it out. And then To Speak to Listen was a little less of a nightmare than Degeneratera, but still a little tough because we had to. This one was all the guys in the band had become more comfortable, just in their own skins as musicians, and we'd done a bunch of tours, and we'd gotten our legs at that point. We put out a product that people liked and people bought, and that was the first time we'd ever experienced that, was during the Degeneratera cycle. Was like, okay, people actually like what we're doing. Maybe we're doing something right. We got to keep on doing it. Now we have expectations. Now we have people that are going to say, well, their old shit was better. That, it's always you run the risk of when you're in a band that consistently releases new material and you're in the public eye. People are always going to like your new shit, and they're always going to like your old shit. And there's people that are going to hate your new shit and hate your old shit. It's all over the map. So we like, okay, we have expectations now. We've got to think about some of these other things with the track listing that we may have not thought of before. And that was when we enlisted Will's help to kind of guide us in the right direction and pick some of the right songs for it, and base things a little more on flow, and take a look at the concept and look at how that applies less chronologically and more in succinct. So the next record is the track listing. I think is going to be pretty tough to nail down, but it's fun. It's a labor of love. It's just more of the egos of the band being like, well, I want this song here and this song needs to be over here. So yeah, it's definitely a contextual nightmare for sure.
Do you see you guys not making a concept record at some point just for the sake of ease?
But possibly. I think that, man, I hope they never listen to this interview, because we've actually had talks with Coheed's camp before, and we've all been fans of Coheed and Cambria forever. We love Coheed.
That's obvious. I grew up a little with Coheed. Bit.
They're a great band. We had a guy come out to one of our shows who he runs the chat room for Coheed. It's like a Coheed fan base
message board.
Yeah, it's like a message board fan club. It's like the big one that they had.
Okay.
And he's an admin, like main publisher there, and he came out, and I got to talk with him for 20-30 minutes, and just sweetest guy, really nice, and loved our stuff. He actually showed Travis and Claudio both our recent records, and they really enjoyed it. And so we have an opportunity to tour with them, I hope, at some point in time. But that being said, I will be completely honest. I think that when Coheed took a step in that direction to not make a concept album.
Was that the one with the Favorite House of Panic on it or whatever? I'm not a really great big Coheed fan. It's like one of those bands everybody else listens to, and so by proxy, like, I know a lot of their stuff, but not because I actively sought it out.
Yeah, my listenership of Coheed is kind of tapered off, mainly with that recent record. I think that they built their core fan base off of this overarching, incredible sci-fi concept with all these different themes and all of this like well thought out business, which has always had some personal semblance. That's what I like about Claudio's writing, is I write from a similar place where I'm applying things to a conceptual narrative, but there is always some personal influence. There's always something going on. Like when you look at Good Apollo 1, Claudio's writing about his like very, very disruptive relationship with his now wife, where you can tell in the lyrics he's just like he's in pain, he's like really struggling, and he applies it to the concept beautifully, but there's a personal element there. He basically took out all of the technicality and all of the concept foundational epicness, I would say, I think is the best way to describe it. Took that all out and made a record that's just the personal. And that to me it just didn't hit home with me. That record just didn't really resonate with me the same as the rest of their records. And I feel the same way about Migrant from the Deer Hunter.
Okay.
I loved all the acts from the Deer Hunter, loved the act series. The color spectrum, one of the best records I've ever heard. Again, it's a concept record from the fact that like he recorded these different EPs at different studios, and he was able to capture these different essences and all this different stuff. And it just, again, it was something I hadn't heard before. It really blew my mind. And then Migrant was he intentionally publicized it as, okay, I'm not doing the concept, guys. I'm not, please buy my record. I'm not doing the concept this time. Check it out. And it's like, okay, I as an artist, you have every right to do that. And there are definitely going to be people who love that stuff. I was not one of them. I like a lot of that conceptual stuff. It's the same thing with, again, Portugal the Man, last band I'll name. they've never done concept records necessarily, but a lot of their earlier stuff just had an explorative element in it, and like an existential element, or like an very open concept type of narrative, and they grew out of that, and they, it made them more money for sure. They're definitely richer. I mean, my shit's not in Taco Bell ads or getting played. I remember hearing that New Portugal song. I was taking a shit at a pilot in Kansas. I was like, I'm in a pilot in Kansas, and this song it's on the radio in the bathroom, and that those guys are cleaning up. And so there's something to be said for that. But for me, I'm 26. I'm still kind of at that age where I still want to make art that I really enjoy. I still want to make art I believe in. And I haven't compromised that for the sake of ease yet. But ask me again in like 4 years when I turn 30. And we'll do this again in 4 years. I'll let you know if that still holds true.
When you start, it's funny. More oftentimes than not now in my 30s, I've, like, my wife and I will be sitting on the couch and talking about how our credit scores are. And if we, like, things we can do once we pay off, like, different loans and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, what the fuck? Like, what happened to being like, it's Wednesday, it's half off at this bar, let's just go and have some fun. It's like, let's look at our credit scores and watch, like, the fucking flipper flop for, like, the millionth time.
I know that life, man. Yeah, I'm starting to get to that point now where I'm like, oh man, I've got to really start adulting the right
way. Something and you don't have to answer this, I guess. Something I've kind of wondered, though, in addition to just kind of the sonic landscapes you guys go through, and some of the different readings that you have mentioned on a couple of different podcasts. Like, you had even talked about and I should have remembered what the title of the books and the authors, but the two books that basically represent Degenitera, and then basically Where to Speak to Listen, kind of the duality of, like, those two books and how they applied to each of the records. And I don't know why I always associate the question I'm going to ask with the scene from Between Them Buried and Me when they were making I can only think of the album cover, the one with, like, all the big cityscape of, like, the neighborhoods and all that shit. Zapper colors. The Great Misdirect. They're showing when they were recording this, like, trippy psychedelic part, and none of them do drugs or anything, so they just sat in a dark room with, like, black lights on and smoke machines and just did this crazy, like, delayed solo and all that kind of stuff. And so whenever I think of stuff like that, that's, like, my first thought, but then I'm always, like, on the other side, it's like, I assume sometimes people are into, like whether it necessarily be weed or, like, hallucinogenics to kind of help open your mind and just kind of think of some of these different concepts and kind of be able to think outside of yourself. And I know it sounds really shitty to have to be like, oh, you got to do that, to sometimes be able to do that, but because I used to be, growing up, one of those people who was like, oh, drugs are bad. And then it's like I had someone who was like, you should try mushrooms. These are interesting. And I was like, holy shit. Like, I became very aware that I become very fascinated with time. And think about how we were walking, quick story, like, we were walking, like, my two friends and I, they were walking their short dogs, and I have, like, a 100-pound lab. And I was like, I'm not fucking doing that. That just seems like way too much work. And so I just went for the walk, but they had to keep picking up their little dogs. And at one point, there was an old couple that had walked past us, or was walking past us, and then this jogger comes running in while we were stopped. And I started laughing, and they were like, what's going on? What's so funny? And I go, I know I'm fucked up. Like, I know I'm tripping right now, but I was like, but I'm cognizant of it. But I just had this thought that, like, those old people are in our past. We're in our present. And the jogger just was in our future, came in our present, and is now in our past, but is in their present.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's a different trip of time.
Yeah, and so they were like, what the fuck? And I was like, I know it makes no sense, but, like, it makes perfect sense. And it's really weird to think of how different each of our lives are, but how they have different crossing patterns and how we all intersect sometimes. And, for a split moment, like, this person's a part of my life, my present right now, but now it's my past, and I probably will never think of them again. But that, it's just weird shit like that. Sometimes, like, when I listen to some of your music and some of the lyrics and stuff, because I don't have a hard copy, so I don't have, like, the lyrics to read. But, like, from what I can pick out, sometimes I'm just like, man, I could totally see, like, that thing, like, where you're just, like, have, like, this train of thought, and you're, like, thinking of something, and then you're like, I'm going to write this down, or record it, or whatever, like, just kind of as a stream of conscious type thing. And then I've kind of have wondered if that's something collectively any of you have kind of done to really like where you've done something like, wow, this thing is really cool. Like, check this out. And is whatever, or if it's just kind of one of those things where it's like, no, we're very much like Between the Buried and Me, where we just like sit in a black light room and smoke machines and try to get an idea of what it would be like.
I love this question.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, this is great. Couple of answers. I have to answer it in a particular way.
Okay.
But before I do that, so that when you were telling me the story, the past, present, future, and you're talking about the stream of consciousness and crossing paths, there's actually a word for that.
Okay.
And it's the title of LP4. So I found that one. I'm not even shitting you. I found that one word that applies to that exact general framework or that general concept where everyone is living a cognizant life separate from your own. Mm-hmm. And this word really is the only descriptor in any Latin or English language that I could find that really nails that on the head. It's a beautiful concept, and it's so open and so genuine, so pure. And so that leads me to the rest of your question, which was, I think, as more or less have we used psychedelics or like experienced something in that train of thought, brought it to the table, like thought about those concepts, thought them out and bring them to the table. And the answer is definitely yes. There are some of us in the band that have never experimented with anything like that. There are some of us that have used. I mean, there were a period. I will just speak for myself.
Okay.
There was a period in my late teens, early 20s where I was very into psychedelic use. I did a lot of LSD. I did. I ate a lot of mushrooms. I did a lot of MDMA. I tried DMT a multitude of times, and I wouldn't say, if you've ever done psychedelics, if you've never done psychedelics and you're listening to this, and you really just have no frame of reference, it's okay if you think it's bad. That's cool. Like, just do a little bit of reading, do a little bit of research, and
do it in a safe space.
Exactly. I'm not advocating for drug use.
No.
I don't think that should be a prescription for anybody to go out and do psychedelic drugs. But what I will say is that I had a really interesting childhood. It was very, I'm going through this with a therapist of mine right now. It's just some very traumatic moments as a child that really left me pretty confused as a young adult. I was basically homeless from the time I was 16, 17. I was working full time since I was like 15 years old. I was out on my own. I was really independent, and I had a kind of a weird childhood, and that led me to a very confused place when I was in my late teens, early 20s. And I was very anti-drug, anti-alcohol, anti-substance. I mean, I was basically straight edge when I was in my teens. And then I had a couple people in my life that introduced me to marijuana when I was 18, and that kind of like opened the door of my perception of like, oh shit, like this is how I've defined my life for this long, and I've lived to these anxieties. I've lived in this body and in this headspace for a long time, and now I'm outside of that headspace. And I can kind of explore what it is to be out here. And again, I don't think I abused psychedelic drugs necessarily. I think if you have used psychedelics, you know that abusing psychedelics is kind of a tricky thing to do. If just hits of LSD, you probably don't want to do LSD again for a while. That's generally the experience that most people that I know have had, is where you've done a psychedelic drug, and if it really melted your face, you're probably good for a little bit.
Thankfully, I've not had that experience, but I treat it with the respect of this is like a one thing every so often, and I just really enjoy whatever happens and kind of just remember that. But
and it's like it's the same for everybody. It's not a one size fits all. Like, just like for most people, if you get so drunk that you are just hungover as shit, you might have a beer or something the next day. I highly doubt, unless you have an alcohol problem, that you're gonna go out and get fucking trashed again the next night and the next night and be puking your ass off. Like, It's just not how the human body's meant to work. So,
No.
But again, my main point there, when I was in my early 20s, I experimented a lot with that. And that honestly kind of shaped the foundational concepts for Eidola. I mean, that's what shaped the band. Like, that's how we came up with the name. That's how we came up with a lot of the groundworkings for the material that we wrote, the Great Glass Elephant. We were in a headspace where a lot of us were experimenting with those types of things and those types of concepts. And we definitely grown just immensely since then. I would say that they're, that's not really a super potent factor in what we do.
No. Just it's something collectively I've kind of feel like I've gotten hints at, and in some of the books that you've talked about, specifically some of the things and the themes within and the things discussed deal with drug use, and I think one of the books you had talked about when I was doing some research on it was basically about like LSD. And the effects on the human brain and what it did to people and so on and so forth. So, I mean, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, I feel like you can only read so much of that kind of stuff before you're like, well, let's see what this is. Or you've already had those experiences, so when you're reading it, you're like, man, yeah, this really makes sense, and yeah, I totally know what this is coming from, as opposed to just being like, well, I've never experienced it, this must be full of shit.
Exactly. Yeah, no, totally. I wholeheartly agree. It's it's interesting. There's another book that I talk about a lot called Be Here Now, where Richard Alpert, there's the whole first third of the book is all about how him and Timothy Leary were Harvard professors, and they were teaching they had federal funding, they had grant funding to experiment with LSD, DMT, and psilocin. They had all these grants to basically go and do psychedelic research and see its effects. And then, you have Nixon coming in and fucking things up for everybody. And they had a lot of breakthroughs in that. And the first third of that book really talks about the usage of those chemicals and what they do to the human psychology, to the human consciousness. And the middle third of the book really talks about how Richard Alpert made his progression from this Harvard professor to where he just lost all his identity and was reborn as Ram Dass, this guru. And he did that he traveled to the Himalayas, and he met with a Maharaji, and he gave him a bunch of acid. He gave him it was an insane amount. It was like 1,300 milligrams of something of LSD. It was a lot. Enough to put a normal person down for sure. Like you're for like 2 days. And he gives the Maharaji these, it's basically like a tincture or these capsules, and he just takes them in his hand and eats them straight up, just no hesitance, nothing. And they wait for a bit to see, if it kicks in, and nothing happens. The Maharaji is just completely at peace. He's completely normal. And Ram Dass, Richard Alpert, is like completely dumbfounded. He's like, what? Like, if I gave this to a student, it's like horse tranquilizer. Like, they're not going to be able to function. Right. How are you just normal? And he's like, oh, I live here. Like, this is me all the time. Like, I operate at this frequency 24/7, dude. He basically is like, through meditation and yoga practices, I operate at this frequency of awareness and consciousness at all times. And so Ram Dass basically gives up drugs and studies with the Maharaji, and then brings those teachings to the West back in like the 60s and 70s, kind of progressing into the 80s. And he's still alive today. He still does talks. He still does guided meditation. He still writes. Very, very cool guy. He still does that to this day. But that's kind of where I see Eidola having come, in our journey, is
coming down the mountain and
once you've opened that door enough times, you're like, okay, I know what's in here.
Right.
I can experiment with it. I can go through and I can check out what's there, but inevitably I'm going to have to come back. I'm going to have to close the door. I'm going to have to be back in a sober body.
Right.
If I figure out a way to just open the door an amount that is comfortable within my sober mind, through other means, like I'm going to try to do that. I'm going to try to do that in a healthy way. I'm going to try to do that in a productive way. And I think all of us has kind of come to that place. And we all do it through different ways. Not all of us meditate, not all of us exercise. I got into exercising and I mean, I've been into meditation for a while, but I didn't get into like physical stuff, like fitness until
Looks like you go hiking quite a bit.
Yeah, I go hiking a bunch and I lift while I'm at home. Like I go to the gym as much as I can when I'm at home, because again, that's another cathartic thing that I didn't think of when I was younger. That really helped me now as an adult to kind of cope with things in my life and just feel better, just feel healthier, and feel like I'm a better person to contribute those ideas with. So,
kind of shifting gears a little bit. This is where I'll kind of bring up the Dance Gavin Dance stuff, which is not something I necessarily wanted to stick on, just because, as I kind of have said in our correspondence, as a 33-year-old person, Dance Gavin Dance wasn't really on my radar even 10 years ago. That's, when metalcore was like my thing. And the flag I was waving really big, really strong. And, but I have a healthy respect for any band that's doing something 10 years later. I mean, that doesn't happen by fucking fluke. And having been to Warped Tour this last year, this most recent one, and seeing I through other podcasts that have kind of heard this was like the sour note of Warped Tour of the last few years as far as attendances go. But I mean, you can't really blame that necessarily on any of the bands. I think this is one of the more stacked lineups that it's had, the strongest lineups it's had in probably the last 5 or 6 years easily. So one of the first things I kind of had wanted to ask was, with starting your own band and then getting the opportunity to join Dance Gavin Dance, was there any hesitation on your part to not want to do that for fear of potentially being perceived as taking the easy way out or taking any time away from your main focus of Eidola?
Absolutely. I actually turned it down the first time that it was offered to me. Yeah, not a lot of people know that, but the first time it was offered to me, Josh Benton was the last like official guitar player, even though I'm coming up on the amount of time that Josh was in the band. I've been in the band by now. So, but yeah, Josh was in the band for, I think something like 3.5, almost 4 years. And he recorded Degeneratera, and we were doing vocals, and I was in the vocal booth in his parents' the upstairs of his parents' house, and I'm in the vocal booth and I'm laying down takes. Will's in on the couch producing, and Josh is in the chair. And Josh stops the take, turns around to Will, and is like, "Hey man, I need a steady job. I'm not gonna go on this tour that we have coming up." And Will is like, "Okay, well then you're not in the band anymore." And so
that's real awkward for you.
Like, "Okay, Andrew, can you come out real quick?" So I walk out there, literally just like I just gotten picked up by Will's label. I was a fan of Dance Gavin Dance for a bit before that, and I was just laying down takes, and I come out and Will is like, "Hey, do you want to be in Dance Gavin Dance?" And I was like, fuck, like this is the most conflicting position, because this guy that's engineering my record is the job that I'm taking right now. Like if I take this opportunity, I'm basically slapping Josh in the face. And who knows what else? Like, am I giving up this opportunity to do a record that I've wanted to make for a long time, and to really give my band an opportunity to have a bigger platform? And so I turned him down. I said, you just signed my band. I really want to see this through. I want to at least make this record, do some touring, get my legs under me. And then if you still need a guitarist in like a year from now, hit me up. And that's exactly what happened. Eric Garcia toured with them for 4 or 5 tours. And then he called me and said, "Hey, Dance is doing this 10-year tour with Slaves and A Lot Like Birds and Strawberry Girls. Do you want to come and do it?" And I was like, fuck yeah, I'm down. Eidola's done all this touring. Our record did well enough to get us a decent platform. And so I agreed. And at that time, I still had some fears that my main fear was that my own bandmates were not going to really understand it, that they would be, kind of personally hurt or offended. But we found a good balance over the last 2.5 years that the schedules really haven't conflicted. The only shows I've ever missed in the last 2.5 years for dance were the first 5 shows of Warped Tour, and that was Eidola was still on tour with Hail the Sun at the very end of that, and it was fine. My friend Joey from Icarus the Owl flew out and covered for those 5 shows, and then I played the other 40 or whatever shows were left on that massive ass tour, and it's been good. It's been it's been work for sure. It's definitely work with both bands. I obviously don't get paid like a full time DGD member, but I get the opportunity to play these great shows with music that I like, with people that I enjoy the company of, and I get to I get to write on some of the records too. I got my Mothership plaque up in my new apartment that I got from writing on Deception and collaborating on Chucky, and this new record I just got done writing a couple of songs for. They're tracking drums right now with Chris, so hopefully I'm going to fly out there in the next couple weeks and track on those couple songs too, which is always a killer opportunity.
So something I've kind of spoken to right after I came back from that Warped Tour in Connecticut. Now, I've been to a couple of Warped Tours over the last handful of years to go see Every Time I Die. They're like my favorite band, and I don't think I've missed a Warped Tour year that they've done.
Love those guys.
Just incredible.
So good.
So a friend of mine's was on the tour this year for CKY. You might have seen him. Frank, I know some of your band members were wearing his cat clothing.
We hung out with Frank, yeah, for sure. Frank's
okay.
Boy.
So that was one of the reasons we went, was to go hang out with Frank. Like, I've known Frank for a handful of years now, and so it was just like kind of like a fun, like, you don't know I'm going to be here and don't associate with me with being out on the East Coast. So it was a good surprise. But he ended up hooking it up with backstage passes, or the non whatever escort needed shit, so we could just go wherever.
Yeah. You get to go on side stage and stuff, yeah.
Yeah. So the interesting thing for me in an episode that I had done shortly after that happened, I went on to great lengths about how, for most people, the attitude was almost like, oh, I deserve to be back here, and just kind of being a fucking asshole about being side stage or backstage or whatever, wherever you were that the normal people who bought a ticket weren't allowed to go.
Mm-hmm.
Now, because I put on shows and I've watched so many like band documentaries and stuff, I'm more fascinated with the behind the scenes things, and I always have been. And I remember like walking around to the different stages and going side stage and all that kind of stuff, and I was more focused on what was happening behind the scenes. Like that, I can only speak to the Connecticut date, but I know that there are other venues like this where it's like it's an amphitheater cut in half, and then there's like your two side stages or your two stages. Mm-hmm. It was incredible to see techs for the tour and techs for the band working together to tear down basically a club setup, really, if you really want to boil it down to what it is.
Yep.
Tear it down, do a light sound check while the other band's only like 5 feet away playing, and then keeping everything on pace, because having run my own shows, I know that running shows is so fucking hard, and the stupidest things will make you run behind, and that can cost you money or cut into someone else's set or whatever.
Totally.
So for me, it was a very interesting, eye-opening experience to see what a tour of that level and the professionalism that it requires to be on that kind of a tour, whether it be the lowest person to catering. Like, I even got to go back and like hang out by catering, and that was a trip even unto itself. Yeah, and just seeing the side hustles of other people who are like cutting hair or whatever, or
Mikey Cuts got me up on that tour so many times.
Or even like the Think TEI stuff, like where people are talking with, whether it be people within the bands or the band's fans or whatever. Like, there's just so much learning to be done on that tour, and that was all that's just for me going on one day.
Yep.
So I can only imagine for you having another band that's at this level where maybe it's not out of the realm of possibility to, and the dirty word in the industry, buying onto a tour like that potentially, or tours that are of that nature. When you get the opportunity to be in Dance Gavin Dance and do the whole Warped Tour run or tours like that, what do you take out of those things? What are the learning experiences you have taken that you are able to apply due to the opportunity you're in to then apply it back to Eidola?
Yeah, it's there's a lot. I mean, it's always an educational process. I feel like I learn something new in each tour that I do with dance. I learn something new. I learn about bigger venues, backlining, certain ways that we can streamline a process that you really don't think about when you're at that younger level, or I don't want to say lower level, but you get what I mean.
Yeah.
It's you're not at a
Where
level
you
where
are on the totem pole.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you get to see how things work on that next level, because it's, as with anything with music or entertainment in general, like, you're a magician, so to speak. You're kind of providing these people with this illusion. And I remember feeling it when I was a kid, when I would see Circus Survive or ISIS play, and I didn't know anything about lights or gear or anything. And so you look at the show and you're mystified. And then you become a cynical asshole over time when you pursue the career, and you're like, oh, they're using this gear, and this is what I can use from their set in my set that's gonna come off this way. You're very analytical.
Yes.
And I think any good musician is like that. They're gonna go out and they're gonna observe and try to soak in as much as they can. And Warped Tour was a very, very rich environment for all of that knowledge. It was just rich with these very talented people, and there were bands that I could not stand listening to on that tour, and bands that I loved watching. I mean, Counterparts, holy shit, man. Counterparts blew my mind every time I watched them. They were so good. That whole tour turned me on to the band completely. I love that band now because I got to witness them and their professionalism and their live performance, their sound, just everything that they're doing on stage. It just resonated with me. So I get to see all these different people working and doing what they're passionate about, and that just inspires me. And so that gives me inspiration to take back to Eidola, business prowess, contacts, all this different stuff that just inevitably helps the projects I'm trying to build. And not just Eidola, but my own personal branding, like my own personal gift to people is my art and my music. And that obviously hasn't been it's been strictly Eidola and dance so far, but I have a lot of projects in the work for 2018 that I'm really excited about, that I am already working on, that are branching out. And because I was so inspired from that tour, I just want to keep branching out. And I feel like a problem for me for a long time with Eidola was because it was my baby. Any good idea I had, every single good idea, I would funnel it right into Eidola. Now I'm reaching a point where Eidola is self-sustaining enough, and me as an artist, I want other avenues to express myself, that maybe not every good idea gets to go to Eidola anymore. Maybe some get to go to a solo project, or one gets to go to a heavier project, one gets to go to kind of a this other project I'm working on. Like, it's going to be a really good next couple of years. I think I'm very, very excited to kind of undertake some of these new projects and apply all that stuff that I'm continuously learning. Warped was, no exception. It was really, really cool.
Totally shifting gears, kind of done on the band thing for a little bit. Through following you on Facebook, that sounds really creepy. through being internet friends, as it were, for a handful of years now, basically since that tour that I didn't get to book you guys on because
our van broke down.
I was so bummed. We had to. Case Raw guys stayed with us for a long weekend basically, and we took them out, and it was a good time. But with that being said, like, having been friends on the internet and being able to kind of get a peek into your life, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like, at least that I've noticed maybe in the last year or so, and this may be something you've dealt with your whole life, but it's only something I've kind of become slightly aware of. Did I read, or did I kind of infer correctly that you have been dealing with Lyme disease for at least a little bit, or maybe your whole life?
That is correct. It's actually been just the past year or so,
okay.
Just a little over a year, and it's been a little difficult. It's we did a show where I was walking through it was in Las Vegas. It's at a place called Eagle Airy Hall.
Okay.
And I was walking through there's brush near that area.
Yeah.
And I got bit by something on my shin. And I was like, okay, I get bit by bugs all the time, whatever. brushed it off. And then the next 2 days, I was deathly sick. Like, I thought I was going to die. I was just profusely vomiting, had a crazy fever, and I didn't know anything about ticks. I didn't know anything about Lyme disease other than John Mess had it from Dance Gavin Dance for a period of time. And so I just paid no mind to it. And I healed from this like flu-like sickness, and I was good for maybe a couple weeks. And then I started to get these crazy weird pains in my abdomen, my epigastric region. I started getting pain in my back. I started getting these weird tremors, these weird, they're like...
Spasms?
Yeah, they're basically muscle spasms. Yeah, and they would be all over my body, unexplainable. And psychological symptoms that really weren't making sense to me. Like, you hear a lot of people that have Lyme disease, they talk about like this mental fog or this like bipolar-esque mimicking type symptom. And I hadn't felt these like levels of depression or anxiety since I was a kid, since I was maybe 16, 17. I hadn't really thought of suicide since I was that young. And so something was really wrong. I just felt like something was very wrong. And I continued to tour through, I mean, I've obviously continued to tour the most I've ever toured in the past year, honestly. I've been gone for very extended periods of time. And I went to a bunch of doctors. I went to probably 6 different doctors, and they all diagnosed me with different shit. They all said, one guy said it was heartburn. The other guy said it was like a completely gastrological issue. And then I went to a GI specialist, and they did an endoscopy where they stick the camera all the way down your throat. And they diagnosed me with, it's called a hiatal hernia. It basically means that there's a piece of your stomach that comes up through your diaphragm by your esophagus that causes, again, more heartburn. They diagnosed me with esophageal ulcers and just unexplainable symptoms. And they gave me all these different pills to take, and none of them helped. I remember being on the mothership tour and trying these new pills, and none of them helped. And it was tough. I would say this year's probably been, like, the last 12 months have been some of the hardest and yet some of the most rewarding of my whole life, because I've gotten to do some things I never dreamed I could even do, which is tour Europe and be on Warped Tour. I mean, those are 2 things that I'd always dreamed of doing, and I got the opportunity to do those. But I was in pain the whole time. I'm in chronic pain every single day of my life. There's not one waking moment where I'm not in some sort of physical chronic pain. And I even had the last doctor I went to before I stopped going to the doctors. It was two things. They basically tested me for Lyme because I'd done all this research. All of my symptoms matched up. I had blood work done where I had it's a chemical called bilirubin.
Okay.
And it's like how your gallbladder functions. It's a release of bilirubin, and if you have a tumor, like on your pancreas or it's a gallbladder duct that's blocked or gallstones, your skin turns yellow and you have like this excess of bilirubin in like I think it's either indirect or direct. We won't get into crazy medical terms, but basically mine was high for no conceivable reason. And so they have this thing called Gilbert's syndrome, which is like it's not supposed to affect you in any way. It's just supposed to be chronically high bilirubin. And I was like, okay, no one else in my family has that. It's hereditary. That doesn't make any fucking sense. Like, it's got to be something. So I did more research, and it led me to matching my blood test with a lot of Lyme research that was done, a lot of Lyme diagnosis. And so I went to him and I said, hey, this bite happened to me like almost a year ago, like 9 months ago. I think it could be Lyme. Is there something we can do to test that? And the doctor said, well, we can test you for it, but the only test that we have that's covered by your insurance is, and this was right before I lost my insurance. Again, I just turned 26. I was on my parents' insurance. I was able to go in and get those tests done under insurance, and they said the only test they can do is a Western blot, which will show up as a false negative something like 80 or 90% of the time if it's not diagnosed within the first 6 weeks of the bite. So it came back as a negative. And the doctor said, well, the only thing we can do from here, he's like, your symptoms are matching up with what Lyme would be. But here's your recourse for treatment. He said, if we treat you, you're going to be on antibiotics, like IV antibiotics, for like a year to 2 years. And that will mean that you would have to, if you don't quit touring altogether for those 2 years, you would have to take a substantial break from any sort of touring, because touring just takes a toll on your body and your mind. It's just, any musician will tell you that, I believe. And I was like, well, I can't do that. That's my job. Like, this has been the way that I make money for the past, 3 years. Like, I can't really just up and especially not having insurance now, I can't just give that up. And he was like, well, if you want to confirm without a shadow of a doubt, we can do a full panel screening for, it's something like $1,000 that you have to pay. That's not covered by insurance. It's completely out of pocket. You have to pay for a full co-infection screening, and I haven't had the money to go and do that. But he basically told me, like, yes, it's likely that you have Lyme. If it's not Lyme, then this would involve further investigation. We would have to do a colonoscopy to check out your colon. We would need to put you on like a strict diet regimen that narrows it down. He's like, but he kind of gave me some good news and some bad news. He said other than just having chronic pain, that it doesn't lead to any type of fatality until you're later in life, and then it can lead to Lyme carditis, where it attacks your heart and you have a heart attack and you die, or it can go into your brain even more so and really impact your behavior. And a lot of Lyme sufferers from chronic Lyme will commit suicide. And I was like, well, yeah, I definitely have those foreign thoughts. It doesn't feel like me. It feels like a different being, really, at certain points in time. And so we discussed different plans to manage it. So I take magnesium for the tremors and the palpitations. I exercise to kind of mediate the chronic pain. Like, when I'm exercising and I'm healthy and I'm fit, there's less pain that's experienced. The muscles kind of compensate for some of this internal pain. Right. And when I'm really good at home, I have a pretty decent diet, and my stomach pain isn't nearly as bad as when I'm on tour and eating garbage. So, yeah, it's definitely a work in progress, man. It kind of sucks when you get all these doctors that misdiagnose you with all this different stuff, and it kind of falls in that, Lyme kind of falls in that realm of, like, same thing with, like,
could be this, we don't know, it's gonna wait. It's like touring, hurry up and wait.
Yep. And it's like, it falls in the category of a lot of autoimmune disorders, which is basically a what the fuck is wrong with you type of thing, where you got your celiac and your Crohn's, and you've got like fibromyalgia and all these different diseases that are autoimmune that are treated differently. Just like you would use steroids for one of the autoimmune diseases to help it, but that actually makes another autoimmune disease worse. Right. So it's hard to pinpoint. And when you're on tour a lot and you're in kind of that position, it's kind of a catch-22. So I'm really hoping for the best. I'm hoping to manage it for the time being, and as I am able to get more financial foundation in place, I can kind of have that set aside to go through more medical procedures and kind of get it pinpointed and get it treated. It makes touring difficult, but I love playing music. It's really cathartic for me. And I just don't think about the pain when I'm playing, and that really helps kind of keep me sane. So.
Well, that was all I really had for you as far as any questions or anything. So Sweet. This is the fun part where we get to plug socials and maybe any tours or anything. I know you do vocal lessons and stuff like that, so I'll plug that. That would be awesome, man. So as far as Eidola goes, we have 4 shows coming up, all in California. They're 2 with Cianvar, and then one is in Fresno, one's in Camarillo, and then we have Night of the Blue Swan, which is Cianvar Secret Band, us, Icarus the Owl, and Wolf and Bear. That's at Chain Reaction and
Holy Diver in Sacramento. Those are Holy Diver's a new venue in Sac. Our manager just helped open it. Really, really cool. So we're doing those shows. That's like December. It's like November 30th through December 3rd, December 2nd, December 3rd. And then the Mothership Tour starts right after that for Dance Gavin Dance, where we're doing 10 shows, 12 days, playing Mothership in its entirety. And I'm super excited about those. And as far as socials go, you can check out Eidola at idolamusic.bandcamp.com. And that's where we got all our records for streaming. Facebook.com/IdolaUT. And yeah, Instagram's just Eidola, Twitter's just Eidola. And then for lessons, I do offer vocal coaching. I've had years of experience, not only touring and performing as a vocalist, but in teaching and in actual lessons myself. I've worked with coaches like Eric Arsenault, Per Bristow. I have a lot of formal training from earlier years that I apply to my lessons. I like to cater them to the individual. So pretty affordable. It's just andrewmichaellessons@gmail.com.
And then lastly, I always like to play episodes out to a song. So pick a song and maybe give me a story as to why you like it or you picked it. It could be one of your own. It could be something you're listening to.
Well, it could be something I'm listening to, not an Eidola song.
Well, so the funny thing was, and different people have taken this completely different ways, but when I ended up talking with Mark from Atreyu, he was like, man, I've been listening to this Sturgill Simpson song, Turtles All the Way Down. And he was like, so go ahead and do that. When I ended up talking to Jason Wisdom of Death Therapy, formerly of Becoming the Archetype, he was like, well, I need to promote my new record. I'm not like in Atreyu. and kind of went that route with it. So I typically leave it up to whoever. I mean, I just think it's fun, whether it be like a song of your own, then like obviously you can give like a cool backstory on it. If it was something you're listening to, then maybe like, like for me lately, like typically before I do these podcasts, I'm typically listening to Chris Stapleton. And it's not necessarily something that a lot of people would probably assume I listen to, but it's just something that I like absolutely love and can't get enough of. So it's usually like when people are like, oh, what are you listening to? That's, whatever. It's like Chris Stapleton. It's good drinking music. It's good like sitting by yourself music. It's good like
good chilling music.
It's just good chill music all the way around, and it's good like storytelling. So
let's do the song Bouquet by Counterparts.
Okay.
Off their newest record, You're Not You Anymore. I have had that record on fucking repeat since it's been out. It's just so good. And that song, the lyrical content, the musicianship, just everything is just, again, that band left me really inspired from Warped Tour. It's like not everybody's cup of tea. I don't think a lot of people would expect me to listen to hardcore music, but I love it, man. I love that band, and that song in particular is like really helped me through some shit recently, which is awesome.
Yeah, the funny thing was I forgot that they were on Warped Tour. So when their singer Brandon has a newer band called End.
Yes, End. They're super brutal. Yeah, they're really good.
So I had done a conversation with Greg Thomas, who used to be in Misery Signals and Shy Halud and all that. So in it, he tells me about this new band before they had announced who was in it and what it was and all that kind of stuff, before there's even a song or anything out. So then Greg and I get to talking about how it'd be cool if I could get them all for like maybe 5-10 minutes to talk about the record, and then when they kind of release some of the promo shit, like I'll put out the episode. Mm-hmm. So I got Greg, I got Andrew, I got Jay, who used to be in Reign Supreme, and I tried getting Brendan. I never could even get a hold of him, like through any avenue short of me, and I never thought to be like, hey, like, can any of you get a hold of him personally and see if he'll respond to my message? So I never got anywhere with him. And the hardest one, I figure, is going to be Will Putney, because, I mean, that dude's just fucking busy. And I sent him a message, and he replied and was like, what are you thinking, blah, 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 let me check my schedule, let me get back to you. And he got back to me, and then we were trying to figure it out, and it just never panned out. But the fact that I got three-fifths of the band that no one even knew about and had to, like, was, like, super stoked on being able to talk, like, and I had to talk about a record I hadn't heard anything about, which was interesting. So it really kind of tested the chops of, like, okay, like, I've read enough interviews and stuff like that, like, how can I talk about the recording process or the gear used or how it became, like, something from someone's personal perspective without being like, so this song, blah, 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 like, tell me about that. So it was really interesting. But I was so bummed that I didn't put it together that Counterparts were on Warp, because at that point I could have at least been like gone to their merch thing and be like, "Hey, I need you for 5 minutes to agree to do this with me." Because
5 minutes, dude.
I'm sure potentially he probably would have done it, because everyone that was involved was like, "I've been waiting a year to talk about this." So,
Yeah, exactly. No, I'm sure he would have. He's a really nice guy.
that's what I've heard.
Yeah, he's really nice.
But yeah, so thank you for the time, and I know you're busy man between DGD and your solo stuff or your own stuff. By the way, is there any opportunity that you're going to be writing a book?
Yeah, I've actually thought about that. I've actually compiled some good stuff. I think I'm going to work on here relatively soon. I've kind of got to reach that. We've got to reach that age where people will actually buy it and not be like, "Oh, this 26-year-old doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about." Like, well, I've got the experience, but it's in due time. I've still got a lot to learn, and I'm excited to learn it for sure.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a good place to end this podcast on. Thank you very much, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, this will go up next week, so
Sweet. Yeah,
hopefully.
Yeah, keep me posted before it goes up. I'll share it from all the socials.
Awesome. Well, enjoy the rest of your night, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, man. You too. I'll talk to you in a bit.
Bye.